All right, so we're back with Ken and Mike on My Uncle's Escape from Alcatraz. It's been a busy week for those guys. They just People Magazine just released an article about their book and their uncles the other day, and we're getting a lot of good positive feedback on it. If you want more of this content, please subscribe to our channel on YouTube and look for us. And the more people we can get on this, the more we can kind of spread this word around, spread their book around, spread this amazing story around. So please, whenever you can, and also drop us a review on the podcast. We've been getting a lot of positive reviews. People are insanely interested into this case, and it's all part of pop culture. It's in the zeitgeist now. We're kind of pushing it back out there, and our quest to find either the relatives or some sort of clues to down in Brazil. We're still hunting that, and we'll give you some updates on that. But today what I wanted to talk with Mike and Ken is because we've been talking to a couple other people. We had Art Roderick, who is the U.S. Marshal on the case, and Ken and Art have an interesting dynamic, as you saw on the podcast. So I just wanted to check in with both you guys. First talk about Art, and then his ideas and what you thought about his appearance in the podcast. Now he texted us the other day saying, because I guess he actually saw the article and texted us and said, "Good press. I'm reading the book now." So we're hopefully he's going. So it kind of jolted him and kind of coaxed him into reading the book a little bit faster so he can get back on here and talk to us about it. But what did you think about his? Or do you want to say something?
Well, yeah, before we jump into everything, I just want to say also that a couple of people have been reaching out to us about some leads, about people that they know in the Brazilian culture in different parts of the world that might be connected to this case. And I really encourage you to reach out to us, send us an email or a text or whatever. Just bring everything to us, because you never know. That little tiny piece of information that you have might be something that we're looking for, that could fit into a puzzle that we're trying to find. So we do appreciate all of you for sending in those tips. Thank you.
Yeah, because this does go internationally, and we do have an audience in South America.
Nice. Very nice.
All right, so I'm done choking over here. Ken and Mike, why don't you tell us what you thought about Art's appearance and what you thought about his reaction?
Mike, you want to go first?
So, yeah, I appreciated him coming on. And, a lot of what he hasn't read the book yet, but some of the things that he talked about are paralleled in the book. They're corroborated with each other as far as, the background and history of John and Clarence, as you'd expect, because, it's fairly well documented. And, of course, being the marshal in charge of the case, I'm sure he poured over that file again and again over the years. But like you said, it was not as hot case that he was working on all the time. Other things would come up and it just sort of go on the back burner for a while. Probably the most interesting thing that Ken specifically asked him was, the photograph. That was kind of the game changer. Was when on the show, like Ken said, as soon as he sees it, his eyes just lit up. He's like, okay, this is a real piece of evidence, as he put it, actionable evidence that we can do something with, because it can be examined, studied, analyzed. But in the end, when we did the show with Expedition Unknown, the analysis that Ident TV came back with for John was 99.7, which is, you're never going to get past 99.9. That's the highest you'll ever get. And we're like right there. And Ken said, "Is that not enough for you?" And he said, "No, it's not. It's not enough for me. It's not enough to prove that that's John." And I just thought that was an interesting statement that he made. And then I can understand, coming from his background, being a marshal, an investigative kind of person, that you need, many pieces of evidence, not just one evidence, to crack the case.
Yeah,
Well,
I thought.
Go ahead.
No, go ahead, Ken.
No, I was going to say, one of the things that I still stand by, just like I said to Art, the U.S. Marshals were never charged with investigating the case. They were charged to go out and arrest John and Clarence and Frank Morris. They don't really care about any of the evidence that we produce. Art told me years ago, only show me things that will lead me to them, not so much the historical piece of it. And I understand that, because, like I said, the FBI is the one who investigates it. They gave it to the marshals to go arrest them. So they don't really care about whether or not we prove something or not. But I will say this: I've asked him before, why is it that the U.S. Marshals and the FBI are so dead set on proving or carrying the narrative that they drowned and that they never made it out of the bay? Why are they never wanting to look at any evidence whatsoever that we produce? All these years they talk about we had no evidence to run on, we had nothing to go on, and we come out and give them something. And at first they're very, very excited because in the show you can see Art.
Oh yeah.
Art's the one who goes and hires an expert in facial recognition to look at this photograph. And then all of a sudden they start dismissing it. So it's like, okay, we give you the best evidence you've ever had since the escape. And for some reason, they don't want to believe that it's them, which is very strange to me. Like, why don't you want to look at evidence and go forward with it rather than just say, well, we don't believe it's them?
Well, especially since you have in that all those documents you have, there's a document in the FBI files that talks about them being in Brazil.
Yes.
It clearly says it, and we'll show it up here on the podcast. We'll throw it up. It clearly states that they pretty much made it to Brazil.
Yes. And one of the things that I read just the other day in the FBI files, the very last page on volume 17, where the FBI says that they were closing the case with the condition that if any new evidence ever shows up, they would reopen it and they would continue the investigation. As far as I know, when we gave Art that photo, that should have reopened the case. And I mean, this is new evidence. We knew the town and the location that they were at. We gave them evidence that said that this is proof that they made it. As far as I know, the FBI never reopened the case.
Yeah, I mean, they're never going to reopen the case. I mean, look at they have current cases right now that they're working on that they wish they can just close and people won't look at anymore. It's just it's part of that alphabet shuffle down in DC with all those alphabet agencies. They just want to, they want to give. I mean, there are a lot of great people in the FBI, but we know a lot of them. We know a lot of retired people, and they're great agents. They're great people, but I think the way the agency handles cold cases and information, I mean, they don't share information with other agencies unless they're actually literally have to. I mean, we know that for a fact.
Yeah.
And even Art said that. He said that, they don't offer information. They don't give you information. He said the file they gave them, what was like 2 pages long, and that was in 2008. And this thing happened in 62. I would think they'd have reams and volumes of information. They want to go have them hunted themselves because they don't want other people looking at their mistakes.
Right.
And I understand that.
Right.
And, and the fact that you guys were going back and forth, he goes, well, I have the unredacted files and I have the redacted. And then you're like, why don't you just unredact them? Why can't I see the unredacted? Right. He goes, well, there's people's phone numbers and stuff. Like information.
I mean, obviously redact that stuff, but the other stuff, it's like.
Right. I have battled with him so many times about, he would come up and say, well, the U.S. Marshals do not believe they made it, and the authorities do not believe that they made it. And I always ask, show me some piece of evidence. Show me something that you have that backs that theory up. I mean, everybody can have a theory, but show me some type of just anything. I mean, is there something in one of those files that was documented that you say that's why we believe they didn't make it? And there's nothing. Yeah. And it's like, well, it's kind of like what he said. Well, I believe the FBI files. What FBI files?
Exactly.
Which document are you saying you believe? Because as far as I know, there is nothing.
Exactly, because he was told he was only gave a 2-page document. Is it he believes that 2 pages, or has he seen everything and he's just not telling us?
Well, and he did make reference to, because Ken was talking about how everybody under the sun that had any kind of connection to the brothers prior to the escape were interviewed, and and it's chronicled. But Alfred never was, which was just a tremendous oversight.
Astounding.
And then he said that no, there was an interview and those records do exist.
Yeah,
so
but they're not in the files now.
No, they haven't been released, but they're still they're somewhere, because he said, oh no, he was interviewed, and that those records are there. So now of course we don't know where.
So what is he saying? Is he saying that he was or he wasn't?
He was.
He says that he was interviewed. He also says that Officer Chechi was interviewed, but none of that was released to the public. I mean, it's not in any of the files that you can read today. The 17 volumes, there's no record in there whatsoever of those two individuals, nor of Cliff Fish and his discovery along with Olaf of the boat. No, none of that is in there. If it is, it's been withheld and has not been included.
And it's interesting that those three pieces of evidence all corroborate the idea that they got away.
Yeah.
Right. It's not a recounting of what their life was like in the cell, and it doesn't really make a big difference in the case. But seeing the boat, finding the raft on Angel Island, and then Alfred saying, "I know where my brothers are. I'm going to go be with them after I get paroled," all say that they made it. So why are those not in the files? Because it shows that the official idea of them drowning is incorrect.
What I would love to do is like a mock trial.
Oh, I would too.
A mock trial will get
count me in,
because I can get some attorneys and some really well-known. We know a lot of high-profile attorneys, and Art can go get an attorney, and he can state his case, and you guys can state your case. Because I'm telling you, I mean, you don't even have just circumstantial evidence; you have evidence.
Yeah.
Right.
You have evidence. I mean, it's not like
we're very skeptical people, and the stuff that you've shown us is overwhelmingly convincing that they survived.
And it's all in the book. It's like it's not like you're not hiding anything. You don't have anything. You put it all in the book. So it would be very easy to say, "Excuse me, Your Honor, we'd like to submit this book as our evidence. Prove it's not right." And I don't think there's anything in those FBI files. And maybe we're wrong, but it just seems like part of me. I mean, I really like Art, and I really do. I think he's a great guy, and I think but you can definitely tell he's still has that government agent G-man mindset where he's got someone in his ear telling him to toe the party line, or that's just how he thinks. Until he finds some.
I can tell you for a fact that when we first gave him that photo, that was genuine. That his shock in his face, and when we shot the last scene at my mom's house, where he gives us all the information, the results of each of the evidence that we gave him, he came back with, and this wasn't fake. He came back with that photo was the best piece of evidence that they've had in the last 50 years at that time when we shot the show.
Yeah.
The acting U.S. Marshal that was working the case, Michael Dykes at that time, because he was very close to the people on the island, and when I say the island, the park rangers, one of the reasons why our book is never, and Mike's trying, and I hope he's successful, but one of the reasons why our book is not carried on Alcatraz today, you would think our book would be one of the books that they would carry out there, right?
Yeah,
but it
should be on the gift shop right there.
And it will not be carried.
But they've had you guys there. They've had you guys there.
It's because we do not follow the narrative that the island preaches to every individual who comes out there, is that no one ever successfully escaped from that island. And so if you do not toe that line, you will not have a book published out there on that island. And so Michael Dykes was he was interviewed multiple times out on that island. And when we came out with that photo, even though Art agreed at the very beginning, this was them, he believed it. Michael Dykes came back and said, "No, I don't believe it's them." And I even asked Michael, I said, "Well, why don't you believe it's them?" And he said, "Well, I took a ruler." This is literally what he told me. He said he took a ruler and he measured the arm from the elbow to the wrist on an old photograph of Clarence, and he measured that one on the photograph of Clarence in that photo, and it wasn't the same. And I said, how do you know they're even at the same distance?
Exactly. It's forced perspective. You have depth of field. You can't do like a.
And I was like, have you ever been trained in doing this? I mean, no. And I'm like, when does anyone in an airport look at, rather than using facial recognition, look at someone's arm? I'm like, give me a break.
Yeah.
I'm not the sharpest tool in the shed, but I wasn't born yesterday either. I know you're blowing smoke.
Is he still around, this guy?
Yes, he is. I would love to have him on the podcast.
Let's get him on. Let's get him on. I'd love to see. I mean, because I find that laughable. I find that kind of, why wouldn't you want
comical?
Why wouldn't you want any kind of publication or story, even if it was a novel that kind of said all this stuff? I mean, do they have Clint Eastwood's poster there?
Yes, they do. And I brought up one time, and they quit carrying it when we were told about, after we came out in 2015 with the History Channel show, they were very upset. The people on and I say the island, it's really the park rangers. They were very upset about what we did, and because they said it wasn't accurate. And I said, well, you carry the Escape from Alcatraz movie, and that's fiction. And not too long after I said that, you won't find it on the island anymore.
Oh, okay. So they took it down.
They took it off.
That's really interesting. I'd love to talk to someone from there to find out what their rationale is. And
I would love to have one of the park rangers.
Yeah.
If they listen to this podcast, I give them
well, we posted to there's a lot of Alcatraz Facebook groups, and we posted to all of them. So if they're on it, we welcome you on this podcast. We'd love to have this discussion with you. We'd love for anyone else to present their case as to why they think they didn't make it and that they didn't survive, because, based upon everything that's in the book and the current research that we're doing and the hunting that we're doing right now, I mean, we're getting close. We're getting close. And so
we're going to find them before it's over with. We're going to find their children.
Yep. And if they're watching this, we've had Art on. There's nothing that's going to happen to anybody. This case is done. No one is going to get harmed or imprisoned or charged or anything. This case is long gone. This is history. So this is a way to kind of put a nice punctuation mark and validate what happened to your family member. And because it's one of the greatest true crime mysteries of all.
Well, and even Art, we asked him if let's say one or both of them are still alive and they were actually identified and found, would they be arrested or rearrested? And he said, no, they would be processed, and then a day later he'd shake their hand and they'd be released.
Yeah.
They're not going to put them back in prison.
No.
So even Art said that. Yeah.
No. Interesting. I've been getting a couple of questions about Frank Morris. We've been spending so much time on your uncles, and some of the people have been asking me online is what happened to Frank Morris? He made it. Did he make it down there? Did he leave them in Mexico, or did he go down there with Brazil? What did anything in your research kind of?
The only thing that we ever really kind of uncovered about Frank was, the very beginning of it. Fred Breezy, during this 1992 meeting that he had with the England family, one of the brothers or the sisters, I wasn't sure exactly who it was, asked him about, this is the way they said it, what about the other man? They never said his name. And Fred Breezy said, well, there was a third American down there. There was another American man, but I was never introduced to him. And he was with an American woman, blonde. I remember him saying on the interview it was blonde. And so he never said his name. But then when we did the show with Josh Gates, we're meeting with the local residents who said that in the late 60s, there were 3 American men who showed up in that town. So I would assume that he was with them at that point in time.
Yeah. But after that, that's all you had. There's nothing else.
Then he just kind of disappears. There were
Right.
there were a couple of sightings or possible sightings in Brazil of Frank Morris in Brazil, but of course those leads never panned out. But there was possible sightings of him being around that area, and then he just kind of disappears. There's really nothing mentioned about him or of him.
Then the only other thing was Whitey Bulger, because I asked him about Frank Morris, and all he told me one time, sometimes I felt like Whitey spoke to me in code a little bit. Like he would say something, he didn't really want to say what he was trying to say. He would say it in another way of saying it. And he said, Ken, I will remind you again that Frank spoke Spanish and Brazil was Portuguese. So I don't know if he was saying that he eventually left Brazil and went back into Mexico.
Sure.
I'm not 100% sure exactly what he meant, but when he said that.
It makes sense. It makes sense. And I think the fact that, I mean, Frank O'Hearn, he brought up a really good point. He said, Frank Morris was a criminal. Like
Right.
your uncles, they knew how to do something. They knew how to live off the land. Frank was the type of person that didn't have those skills, or at least I don't believe he had those skills. And maybe he had to go somewhere to kind of use those skills outside of these guys, because these guys could kind of create a living for themselves down there as farmers.
Well, I will say this. So, and I'm not going to say anything on this podcast that will jeopardize your investigation that you're doing, but some of the people that we have discovered down there, I happen, and I think I shared it with you, but I happened to find one of their friends, and wasn't related to them, but this individual looks so much like Frank Morris. I mean, it could be his son. I mean, when you look at this individual, you would have said, well, that's Frank Morris.
Wow.
I mean, he looks so much like Frank Morris, and he's friends with all of the other people that we have been talking about.
Got it.
On a private channel. So
looks like we're going to do a lot of DNA kits down there.
Is he still down there? I don't know. I mean, does he have family down there? It's possible. I mean, this individual looks so much like him. I showed him to Mike. Mike, what do you think? Did that look like Frank Morris?
I remember you showing it to me, but I don't remember what he looked like. So
Okay.
You have to show me
I'll
again.
send it to you again.
Send it again. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, like I said, I think.
Actually, while you were talking, let me bring it up on my phone and I'll show it on the screen. And then you tell me whether or not.
Well, just do me a favor. Just send it to me, text me, and I'll put it into the podcast. I don't think anybody will be able to see it.
And make sure there are no names available.
Exactly.
No, there are no names. I made sure I removed all the names.
Yeah. Well, like I said, I mean, I would love to do like a mock trial, have Art can state his case, and you guys can state your case and put the evidence up there, and we can let the viewers decide. They'll be the jury.
I would love that. I've always said, let's bring the federal government with their evidence. Me and Mike will bring whatever we've discovered, and we'll lay it in front of the court of public opinion, and let's see who has the best case.
But to be fair, they got to give you the unredacted files because that's your discovery.
I would love to have it.
I don't know if they'll give that.
I don't know why they're withholding it today.
I really don't either.
It doesn't make sense at all after all this time.
It's not like the Kennedy assassination. It's
Well,
like
I don't understand why they still have all of the letters that the family wrote John and Clarence when they were in prison. They still have them today and refuse to give them back to the family.
that's weird.
I mean,
That
all
is
of the
true.
letters, all of the photos that were in the letters. Like I said, I'm in one of the photos. My sister is in one of these photos.
And you did FOIA requests for those as well?
Yes, I have asked for them to return the letters and the personal items of John and Clarence back to us, and they refuse to do it. Like, why? Why would you not give us their letters? And these aren't letters that they wrote. These are letters that the family wrote to them.
Yeah.
Including
Yeah, that's strange.
Uncle Man. Uncle Man writing these letters.
Uncle Man. Well, let's talk a little bit about that in Frank Ahern, because I thought he was an interesting guy. I thought, I think we surprised him with a lot of the information that we had. I mean, obviously it's been a while since he's really looked into this case, but it was really interesting to hear how he, his little meetings with, Uncle Man at Hardee's and just how he was trying to get him to pay him for letters and any kind of other stuff. So I thought it was interesting how he approached that his methodology to kind of get the information out of him. And Uncle Man was a steel trap. He kept it all in there. You got to.
Well, and I think that's when he kind of realized it was just not going to happen, when that he would sort of talk around the story, and he would describe the different theories as with equal weight, not sort of leaning one way or the other, being very careful about not tipping his hand as what actually happened. Like, oh yeah, there's this one theory, there's this other, they're all valid theories. So he finally realized this was just kind of a dead end, and the show that he wanted to create out of this was just not going to happen, because Ken's Uncle Man he was not going to cooperate in a way that he needed to pitch the show. So it's like, well, it's been great knowing you, and he just moved on, and that was the end of it.
Yeah.
And you know what was so interesting was when I saw the episode, because I believe it was on YouTube when I originally came across it, and I wound up reaching out to Frank, and he sent me the full transcript of what he wrote. But what I found so interesting later on, as years later, was how much Art was intertwined into this story. And he was also very involved in the very first book that the England family ever agreed to do, which was with, it was called Riddle of the Rock. It was Don DeNevy. And this was way back even before they started meeting with I'm losing his name right now. With Fred Breezy. Before they ever met with Fred Breezy, they were writing a book with Don. And at the same time, Don was working with Art Roderick. Like, Art Roderick has been a part of this story throughout much of the, this from early beginning. He said, I didn't even know of. I mean, like, he was kind of like there with Don. Then he was there with Frank.
Well, back up for a minute. So, according to what Art told us, he said he didn't get involved in this until 2008. When was the meet? Well, let me just say this, because and correct me if I'm wrong. Isn't that not what he said? 2008.
Yes, that's exactly.
Okay, I just want to confirm that. And then your meeting with Fred Breezy with the family was in 1992.
That was in 1992.
Okay.
And in fact, on that tape, Fred Breezy makes the comment when he's telling them a very important thing about John. He said, I do not want you to tell Don DeNevy about this, because they were in the process of writing the book at that point.
In 1992?
In 1992.
Okay.
And guess who Don DeNevy was working with? We find out years later, he was working with Art Roderick.
Our buddy Art.
The same person that said that he wasn't involved until much later.
Well, maybe it was where he actually took over the investigation. I mean, as a U.S. Marshal, maybe he had his pinky toe in that case. Who knows? I mean, any kind of America's Most Wanted people.
I think Art was well into the case, well before he told us, much earlier than what he has been truthful with us.
Art, I know you're watching this. It's time to spill the beans. Okay? Unredacted FBI files. Come on here. Let's do it right. Let's get it out there. We got nothing to lose other than the truth.
Lay all your cards out, Art.
Lay all your cards out. You don't work for the government anymore. Well, you still get a pension from them, so who knows? But, But anyway, I think that's hilarious. I mean, it's really interesting.
Well, what was really shocking, like I said, when we were doing a meeting with Frank, was the fact that Uncle Man even met with him to begin with. Uncle Man was very protective of his siblings and the story about his brothers, and for him to agree to meet someone that he didn't even know and just kind of have a conversation, and then even take him over to meet one of my uncles, his younger brother, is totally beyond my understanding of Uncle Man. I never would have believed he would have done that.
Well, I think at that point in his life, I think he wanted to be. If someone's doing something like that, because we get it all the time with doing these cold cases and stuff like that, and not that Uncle Man was a suspect or anything, but that when someone's investigating someone, and if someone was involved in it, sometimes it's better to be close to the people that are investigating you to find out what they have, and so you can kind of. He's probably piecemealing, and like you said, he was being very cryptic with Frank. Wasn't giving him kind of little morsels of information, but he was probably asking more questions and giving out answers in that conversation just to see where he stayed, where he was, and the information that they had. So it might have been him playing a little poker with him to find out what's going on, because he seemed like he was pretty crafty. I mean, he was able to evade that. He evaded a polygraph. I mean, he did that, and we're not sure if he passed.
Well, if you listen to him at the time, he wasn't sure how he passed it.
Yeah, he may not have passed.
I don't know what they asked him.
Did they tell him he passed it? They probably didn't even tell him.
No, they never came back and
they never do
and told him if he passed it or what. All they did was they came and picked him up, took him to whatever location they took him to, polygraphed him, and then brought him home. And that was the last he ever heard of.
Yeah.
And as far as what I'm believing now, Art is the one who picked him up and polygraphed him.
Really?
Oh.
That's what I believe.
Art
was working the case at that point in time.
Oh boy.
Fess up, Art.
Art. You got some splaining to do. I mean, I just don't understand at this point. I mean, it's just the truth at this point. It's just kind of it's putting it to bed, it's verifying it. So the only thing I can think of is it's just that normal reaction to anybody asking. I mean, I just got off the phone on this with a police officer on this other case we're investigating, and it's like these conversations you have. It's like they kind of throw out little kernels of information to you, and actually and maybe even give you hypotheticals about certain things, and you're like, well, why did they choose that person to create the hypothetical? Are they trying to tell me something without not telling me, and because they can't tell me? Right. And so it's like it's one of those things where at this point, though, I mean, we're talking like 62 years later, it's like right. It's in the annals of history. I mean, what are you going to do? I mean, Art, it's at this point, what's the government going to do? It's just in a box somewhere, stored away. I mean, the fact that they won't give you your letters and family photos back, and if anything, they should be in a museum or at Alcatraz or something like that. I mean, or there are personal property that literally that obviously they didn't yield anything for them to find them.
But if the case is closed, is it closed?
No, not officially.
Well, the FBI closed it with a conditional, with a condition that if any new evidence is produced, that they would reopen the case and continue wherever they were at.
But when you showed them this new evidence, they didn't reopen it, though, did they?
Well, that was my surprise, because we didn't give it to the FBI. We gave it to the U.S. Marshals, who was working the case at this point in time. I would assume that they went back to the FBI and said, hey, we've got this new piece of evidence, which is a photo. And, you would think, okay, well, we want to look at the photo and do our own facial recognition with it, right? No one's ever come to us and asked us about this.
Although I do believe that when you did the show in 2015, they did send out some agents to Brazil to do a little bit of searching.
I think he did say. Well, he said that he worked with Interpol.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I'm almost certain that U.S. Marshals went down.
Yeah.
Not FBI agents, but U.S. Marshals.
Yeah.
And then there was another show. I think, Ken, you were sort of very lightly involved. It was that guy who was an investigator, and he went to that farm in Brazil.
Yes.
And where Americans had been renting this house some years before that, sort of kind of maybe matched up to the escapees. And I think he did a phone interview with you.
He
And
did.
after the show came out, I emailed Ken. I said, so, because I didn't at this time, Ken hadn't told me about Montero Lobato. He was just kind of talking about geography, but never giving me names at this point. And I said, so how close were they to where you think they actually were? And he goes, well, they're in the area. So there was that show too that was trying to pin it down, but it was unsuccessful.
Yep.
I still believe the key is we've talked off camera. The key is visiting those locations that I've mentioned, and from what Fred has told us in the meeting with the Anglin family, it was a very large farm, people working for them. People probably are not around today, but I'm sure there would be other children who go, oh yeah, my dad used to work for this, this farm, because like I said, the farm actually looks like it's still maybe not as in one piece that it probably was back in 1970, but they still farm there. So somebody at some point in time, I'm assuming, probably has contact with people that have worked on that farm.
And I'm sure there's land documents.
Yes.
For the farm as well.
Yes.
Whether they put it in someone else's name or not, possibly.
Well, like I said, we were told from Fred that they purchased the land from an Englishman. They never gave his name. His wife died, was bitten by a snake there locally, a local reptile, winds up dying, and he, I guess, gets disillusioned with the area and decides to sell his property. And the brothers, along with Frank, and that's where I'm assuming the money came from, purchased the land, and he goes back to England. So the land, my understanding, it was still in his name. All they did was assume it.
Got it.
Now, if they eventually put it into their name or whoever's name that they were using at that time, some of this information should be very easy to track down. I mean, how many women back in the 1970s or late 60s died of a snake bite in that area? I mean, that's got to be pretty easy to find, right?
English woman, yes.
English woman.
An English woman,
I mean,
although Art did talk about, records back then, 50 years ago, do they even exist anymore?
That's true. In Brazil.
Because one of the things that Fred Breezy talked about at that time, where the farm was, this was in the middle of nowhere. Right. And, it was sort of, he described it as sort of a lawless place that, it was sort of like the Wild West. I think he even used that term, Wild West, at the time.
What was it like when you guys went down there with Josh Gates?
Oh, gosh. It was a really rural town. I think it maybe have a caution light. I'm not even sure it had a stoplight. There was no stoplight. Maybe a stop sign.
I saw the streets. The streets were paved, though.
Yeah, they're paved in Montero Lobato,
but it's not a lot there. I mean, it's a really, and you think back 60 years in the past, it was smaller than that.
Yeah.
So, and that's another good question. So, people who are out there are very skeptical about Fred Breezy. So all of the U.S. Marshals, when we showed them the photographs, including the U.S. Marshal who was very skeptical, they all say, yes, those photos were taken in Brazil. They're all Brazilian. You look at the background. What was Fred Breezy doing in this little small town in the middle of Brazil in the early 1970s? What the heck was he doing there?
Yeah.
I mean, throw out everything else. Why was he in the middle of a no-name town in 1970?
Yeah. And then the other interesting question is, what made them choose that area?
Yes. That's a good question.
I mean, why?
Out of all of Brazil, why did they go there?
Well, it's not far from São Paulo.
It's a couple hours away.
Yeah. But I mean, why?
I mean, there had to be some sort of, and if we go with the story that Mickey Cohen helped them. I'm sure maybe that is the plan that they laid out. I mean, because everything was well orchestrated after they left.
Right.
If everything that we say happened based upon the escape and getting off with the rafts and getting towed out by the prison boat into the middle water, and they cast off and they connect with the Mickey Cohen boat that's in the bay, had been sitting there for how long, we don't know, and then that boat brings them to the shore, and they make it to an airfield where Fred Breezy's gassed up, ready to go, and they have they have cash, they have clothes, they have resources, and they fly to Mexico and they refuel in Mexico. And then why not just stay in Mexico? And then, and if they knew that, that they were not going to get extradited in Brazil, who set that up? Who set the place? All that had to have been planned.
Yes.
I don't think that town was chosen at random.
Well, one of the things that Ken and I, when we did Expedition Unknown and we're climbing up the mountain, it's about a mile hike from the bottom to the top, where it levels out and there's that rock formation that sort of is kind of semi-protective from the elements. When we were climbing up, I mean, it's literally just a little dirt path carved. It's like 18 inches wide, literally out of the middle of the jungle. And we were commenting, like, how would the brothers know to go up here? There's nothing here to signal that at the top there's a place of protection. It just goes up, and it's just nothing but foliage and trees and leaves. You can't really see very far into the jungle, just a few feet at most. How would they know to go up there as a place to hide? They had to have been told, this is a refuge up here for you to
Right.
no one's ever going to find you up there. There's nothing up there at all. We took pictures of the surrounding area. You just see nothing but just jungle all around this place. So they had to have known this is a place to go. Somebody told them.
Yeah,
Right.
it had to be planned.
Yeah. It's just there's no way they would have just randomly ended up there.
Right.
No, that is something that we haven't quite discovered yet. Whether or not it be Whitey Bulger, if it was Mickey Cohen, if somehow Fred Breezy was already kind of connected down there somehow. Somebody, like, I agree with Mike, somebody had already directed them to go to this area. I mean, why would you go to this town versus another town?
Exactly.
There's got to be a reason why we went here,
Well, yeah, I mean, they must have had some kind of connection to someone down there. If there was an Englishman who owned that farm, who knows what the connection was to him?
Right.
In Mexico, do you know any of the people that were there, or the town, or is there anything?
The only thing that I gave maybe a little hint about where in Mexico. I did do a research one time about the farm that Mickey Cohen owned in Mexico, and it was in between. Oh gosh, I would brutalize the name, but it's in between Mexico City and Acapulco, so it's in that area, and it's very strange that whenever in one of the FBI files, as Alfred is telling the story to his cellmate after he meets with Uncle Man, he mentions this area that he believes that this is where they went to. So I don't know if that's where the actual farm was located at, but as Fred Breezy said, when they landed the next morning, they were just north of Mexico City, fueling up their plane. So they were definitely headed in that direction.
Yeah.
I'm not real sure where the farm was actually located at. I'm not sure if anyone really knows.
Yeah. Well, I mean, all we can possibly either gather that Fred Breezy maybe had found that spot. I mean, because he was transporting drugs through his airplane before. And
Well, it was definitely a spot that Alfred knew, because whatever they sent him, and that leather horse picture,
yeah,
that was an indication that he knew exactly where they were at. He had been to that place before, undoubtedly, because he knew where they were at and he knew how to get to that place.
Does the FBI still have that leather horse?
We do.
Oh, you do?
Mhm.
Yes.
Ooh. What does the back of it?
What
Does the back of it look like? Is there any kind of like?
There's really nothing on the back. It's really like a leather looking, like with. I mean, I could send you a picture of it. I have a picture.
I've seen the picture. I was just
Yeah.
kind of curious on how big it was. Was it almost looks like?
It almost kind of looks like a 5x8 photo, but
Got
that size, you know. But it's made out of leather, and it's been bound by leather stitching, and I never really kind of thought about the horse because something about it undoubtedly indicated to Alfred when he saw it that, oh, okay, I know where this came from. Either that or whatever was written inside was an indication to him as far as where the location was. But whenever I started looking at that horse is not a horse. That horse isn't a U.S. horse. It is a horse that's indigenous to Mexico. I think they call it a charro. And when I looked at, you know, where this horse is very famous for in Mexico, it's down in that exact same area. So was it that he recognized something from that pouch? I don't know. Something indicated to him, though, where they were, and he knew where they were at.
Because didn't Alfred go with them to Mexico once before?
Yes, he did. Yes,
so
did.
He would know. I mean, he would have known. He would have had memories of what he had seen there.
He went out with them to California when they went to California. He was with them. They were gone for many weeks, and this is the time frame when they come back. You know, afterwards, they all now have all this money. They're all buying brand new stuff. You can see a picture of Alfred and John that we have, and they're nicely dressed. Dressed to the T. And it's totally different from the way that they were dressing prior to going to California. John now has a brand new car. He has a license plate on the front of it, or a vanity plate, which says Mexico. Where would he have gotten that? Why would he have put a Mexico plate on the front of his car?
Yeah, they weren't lying low, that's for sure.
No, they were not. So
that's
yes, they had been to Mexico. Yeah.
Yeah. So he must have visited that farm with them at some point.
He undoubtedly went with them on that very first initial visit.
Yeah.
And you know, of course, then they get caught.
Right.
And whenever John and them send him, whenever Clarence, we believe it was either Clarence or John, sent him something, he recognized, okay, now I know where you're at. You know, he knew exactly the location. So,
yeah.
And he paid it, you know, he undoubtedly, that's the reason why we believe the authorities ultimately trying to get this information out of him, killed him. And with John and Clarence, after they found out about the death of their brother, they don't know whether or not he gave that information up or not. Exactly. They don't know whether or not he spilled the beans through torture or whatever happened. And that is when they left and went to Brazil. Because they couldn't stay in Mexico. Mexico, they could have been easily captured in Mexico.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Oh yeah. The leather horse thing, how did you get it?
Well, so whenever I have a photo of me and my sister and my brother and my mom when you heard me tell the story.
Yeah, no,
that's when Alfred gave them the photo. That leather pouch. He hands it to my mom and says, I've had contact with our brothers. I know where they're at. And when I make parole, if I make parole, I'm going to join them. Mm-hmm. So he handed that to them.
He wouldn't have said that to his sister if it wasn't true.
You're exactly right.
Exactly. And then your mom held on to it?
She's had it all this time.
Got it.
Yeah, he wouldn't have lied to her. If he didn't know, he wouldn't have told her.
You're exactly right.
Yeah.
And then just within a week and a half later, he's dead.
Yeah, that's bizarre.
Yeah.
I know.
That's all bizarre.
And then you have the whole thing where they're the MK Ultra stuff that they were doing on him too, which is like a whole nother rabbit hole.
Oh my gosh. You're talking about making a movie about the escape from Alcatraz. But you could take the story of Alfred along with Whitey Bulger and what they went through in the MK Ultra testing, and what happened to him. You could make a movie out of that.
Well, yeah, there was a really good book written. I can't remember the man's name, but he worked on it for like 20 years, and I can't remember. But I haven't read it yet, but I hear a lot of people talking about it. And he couldn't. He started out, I think, starting writing a magazine article, and then 20 years later came out with this book. So it's all about how they did it to Charles Manson, and they were doing it to other CIA agents. There's a documentary about a CIA agent whose family was investigating his death because he jumped out of a window and found out he was being tested with MK Ultra, the high doses of psilocybin and LSD. Right. So it's like, it's crazy. I got to get that book, and I want to read it because I want to see if there's any kind of connection to what we're talking about and in the prison that Alfred was in, and also with obviously with Whitey Bulger, because it's a fascinating subject, and it's a really kind of a weird page in our history, using people as lab rats for this, and
that's well documented.
Yeah, but that was back then. Like I said, they did that in federal prisons. Yep. They gave people an option to reduce their time to be a lab rat. I mean, I had a friend of mine that spent time in federal prison because he was a conscientious objector during the Vietnam War, and they sent him out to a federal prison. They didn't even have fences around it. It was out in the middle of the desert in Arizona. They just had chalk outlines of where you're not supposed to go beyond. And if you went beyond that, I mean, you're in the middle of the desert, so there's really nowhere to escape. But he was able to cut his time in half by being a lab rat and being, experimental. I don't know if they did MK Ultra on him because it was around the same time. It was like the, late 60s, early 70s.
When did Fred Breezy die?
Fred Breezy died in 1998, I believe it was. I believe it was 1998. Mike's doing a search for
There you go.
Mike's going. There he goes.
1998, April
1998.
When was the date? 1998. What was the month?
April 26th.
Oh wow!
Oh, right after.
And he was in Belize when he died. I'm not sure why he was in Belize. He was living with a lady, but he's not buried in Belize. His body was sent back to Utah. I think it was Utah, where his mom and his family and his sister ultimately moved to, and that's where he's buried at.
Hmm.
Although his ex-wife is still alive.
Get out. Where does she live?
I think it's Belize.
Oh, she's still in Belize?
Yeah.
Interesting.
Send me that information.
Oh, no. I'm sorry. You're talking about his ex-wife, Judy. Judy, the one that he was married to whenever he went to Brazil and was doing all this. She is still alive, but I am definitely in touch with her. Now, she would be a good one to bring on.
Let's talk to her. I want to talk to her.
Anybody that's still alive, we need to talk to.
I want to talk to her. I've got questions.
I can reach out to her and see if she's interested in doing a podcast. She would be very interesting because she could tell you some stories about Fred Breezy.
I would love
Absolutely.
that. I think that's fascinating because he's kind of the linchpin here.
Yeah. I mean, he's so interesting to me because it's like if it wasn't for him, no one would have any information. And also they wouldn't have met Mickey Cohen. So he's really the nucleus of this whole thing.
If he had not come to the family and shared what he shared and gave those photos, no one to this day would ever have known what had happened.
Why do you think he called America's Most Wanted?
Well, I can tell you what he told the family. The way he told us or the family in that 92 meeting, he said he was out cutting grass. I'm not sure he was still married at the time. I believe Judy had already divorced him. But you got to remember, so whenever he gets caught in 76, he has a lot of money. He explained how he had $1 million in cash on him. With all these airplanes that they were flying drugs in and out of the country and living in a really nice house. After he goes to jail, he comes out with basically nothing. And so he he's going to go meet with the Anglin families. Before that actually happens, he's cutting grass in his yard, and he walks in and he says there was a show on, I believe it was
America's Most Wanted.
America's Most Wanted, and they were talking about the Anglin brothers, and he thought that they had caught them. He thought, okay, the way
I remember
he said it sounded was like that they caught them. So he calls into the number. There's a number up on the screen, so he decides to call in. And when he calls in, according to the way he says it in the meeting, he said, as soon as I called and they had me on the phone, I stepped in a bear trap. He said, they already had me. And he said, according to him, they came and picked him up.
Yeah, Art said that.
Yeah. So
Art said he was one of the.
They came and picked him up and brought him in and started asking him questions. And he said, yeah, I met them, but I can't tell you how to get there. He said they even unfolded a map and said, show us where this is at. He said, I can't draw it. He said, if I was down there, I could probably take you there, but I can't draw it on a map. I mean, he pretty much alluded, tried to, kind of like back away from what he was originally saying to them, but they believed him enough that Art went and picked him up.
Yeah. And that's not enough for Art to feel like they've made it out of the prison. Art.
But what's so strange too about, and in the 92 meeting, he was still in contact with them because he said that undoubtedly there were actually two meetings with Fred Breezy. The very first meeting, my mom didn't record it. No one recorded it. And the family members asked questions to their brother, and he recorded it and sent it down to them, and they were waiting for replies.
Got it. I remember that. Yeah.
And he was still in contact with them during this whole time frame.
What year was that? 1980?
1992. 1992, he was still in contact with them.
That's crazy.
It was.
It's all crazy.
And he even told how he communicated with them. He said he would record the question on a cassette tape. He never said who it was. He said a guy would come by and pick up the cassette tape, and they would get re-recorded, and then it eventually made its way down there, and then they would record something, and it would come back the same way.
You know who also did that? That was their method.
Yes, I do.
Who did that?
That was Osama bin Laden.
Exactly.
Exact same way.
That's crazy.
It is.
All right, guys. All right. Well, listen. Let's see if we can get Fred Breezy's ex-wife on. That would be awesome.
I will reach out to her.
Reach out to her
and ask her.
Even if we have to do a phone call with her and kind of phone her in, if she's not, we'll see what happens. But yeah, I mean, once again, it's fascinating stuff. Art, we know you're watching, so
I'm sure he's listening.
Exactly.
At least.
All right. Read that book. We want you back on because we got some more questions for you. All right. And all right, guys. So we'll talk to you next week.
All right.
Sounds good.
See you then.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.